communist before or after South Vietnam did?
After, but as far as I know, I don't know enough about that to comment. I think it's after, but don't. You have to understand the communism in South Vietnam and that area isn't like Marxist communism, right? The jobs that the people held after the war, a lot similar to the jobs they held before the war, right? But I want to talk about foreign policy and détente. We talked about containment, we talked about mass retaliation, we talked about flexible response. Well, let's talk about Nixon's foreign policy, okay? Can you guys write this stuff down to remind me, because I need to use the board. So it's détente, little thing. China, Brezhnev, by the way, Brezhnev's going to be the guy who finally comes to power after Khrushchev. We'll get this down and then I can just finish out. And then we can do a lot more visual stuff on Tuesday. I don't know what I'm doing on Monday. Teachers have to be here. You guys don't.
I'll be here. We're understanding.
Why will you be here?
We have track unless it's a snow day.
You could fence.
Well, it's not good.
Okay, and then the energy crisis after that, and that should take us to the end. You guys get that? All right. I want to talk about détente. This is great. I'm going to draw, and I'm way better at this than you are, so don't get intimidated. Okay? Here's the United States. Here's the Soviet Union. And here's China. Okay? These are not the scale, but they're pretty close. Okay. Now, theoretically speaking, you would think that what two countries should be BFFs? The USSR and China, you think, should be friends, and the reason is because they're both communists. Right. I like country music, you like country music, I have on boots, you have on boots.
You're
right.
really cold, I'm cold sometimes.
Part of my place is cold. Your language is odd, my language is odd. And they were actually allies up through the 1950s, but Khrushchev and Mao did not hit it off. Khrushchev was hysterical, but he was not absurdly irrational. I mean, he did take off his shoes and pound them at the UN, but when he met with Mao, Mao wanted to go ahead and trade nuclear weapons with America. What I mean is, he wanted to get it on. And Khrushchev was like, you could possibly lose 450 million of your citizens. And Mao was like, okay. And Khrushchev knew that with Mao, he had kind of a loose cannon. And some of they had border issues. Obviously, you can see that they share a pretty large border. They were very suspicious of each other. Culturally speaking, the two of them do not have a lot in common. Obviously, they've shared borders for a long time, but where is the majority of the population in the Soviet Union? Yeah, it's European, right? And in the Soviet Union itself, a lot of the population isn't even Russia. Russia's the biggest one, but you have Lithuania, and Estonia, and Latvia, and Belarus, and Kazakhstan. These have pretty sizable, in Ukraine especially, which is more European, not so much Kazakhstan, but it's this way. And so to say they have like a cultural sort of symbiosis with China is not necessarily accurate. So here's what Nixon looks at. He says, all right, first thing we want to do is establish détente, which you have. What détente is an easing of relations. He wanted to cool things down, which is, I know, kind of hard to swallow because it's the Cold War. But he wanted to not make relations so hostile. And that was the idea of détente. But how he did this was brilliant, because only a paranoid guy comes up with this stuff and makes it work. He said, all right, there are three main powers in the world that I need to worry about. Us, the Soviets, and the Chinese. And all of us are suspicious of each other. So what would be the most rational cause? He believed in something, he and Kissinger believed in something called realpolitik, which I'm sure you learned about last year. Bismarckian politics. everything that you do is to find your own advantage strategically. You make friends, but only to make friends for your own strategic benefit. You don't make friends because you happen to like the guy, right? Well, we're going to be friends with China because drinking with Mao is so much fun, right? You don't do that. You make decisions based on your own selfish, strategic purposes. Purpose. That's exactly how. I'm going to wear this scarf today because it's going to bring me benefits socially. So what Nixon did was he decided to play these two off of each other. And so he began contacting the two. He began contacting the two, and he goes in 1972 and he visits China. So Nixon goes over, and there are great pictures I'm going to show you of him with literally sitting next to Mao, sitting next to Chairman Mao. Think about what you're talking about. What has Nixon represented? The whole time we've been talking about Nixon. Fierce anti-communism, right? This guy's a McCarthy guy. He was on the ticket in the 50s because he was a fierce anti-communist. He is going to China to hang out with Mao. He is one of the people who was mostly critical of Truman for allowing the Chinese to take over, the communists to take over China, right? Some argue that it was only people like him or maybe Reagan who could make these concessions because people understood their anti-communist credentials, right? So he could be more lenient. Somebody who was liberal would be seen as sort of kowtowing to these people. But he goes over there and he begins discussions. Kissinger, Nixon go over there. Now you're the Soviet Union, you're Brezhnev. What are you thinking to yourself? The U.S. and China are going to have a relationship. Who's left out in the cold? Us. We are. So guess who gets an invitation to Moscow? Nixon does. And then Nixon goes over to the Soviet Union and meets with Brezhnev and starts a relationship with Brezhnev. And now who gets all jittery?
Mao.
China does. And Nixon is able to use this type of real politic. It's not like he likes Soviets, and he certainly doesn't understand Chinese communism. My favorite line while he was there is he went up on the Great Wall of China, and when asked about this, he said, "It certainly is a great wall." Nice. But you hit that one out of the park. But what he's done is he's put America in the position where the Soviets and the Chinese are trying to give him favors. Theoretically speaking, these two countries have more in common. They're Asian, they share a border, they're both communist, they both have weapons pointing at America. And Nixon was able to turn that on its head. And today, China has opened up its markets, right? And on some level, its social structure. And many people have said it was because of the first foundational diplomatic, sort of inroads that Nixon made.
Probably also now say no, probably very little.
Well, yeah, but you have to also understand the Chinese it's not like they're a jet ski. They don't turn on a dime either way, right? In Foreign Affairs magazine, they were talking about the new leaders that's come into China, and he's more reform-minded. But when you say reform-minded Chinese communist, right? It's not like a reform-minded muckraker being elected or something like that. I mean, it's all relative. And are they Maoist in the sense that, like, the culture? You guys learned about the Cultural Revolution, right, last year, and the deaths of tens of millions of Chinese for no particular reason. These people don't do that, but it's not like these are soft little kittens either. Right.
My favorite joke was the Chinese communist cat eat Malmix.
That's really, really good, Heather. What is next on your thing? We have China, we have Daytona. What's next? Is Salt next? Or is Brezhnev next?
I don't know so many jokes like that.
Brezhnev, after Khrushchev left in the mid to late 60s, once the Cuban Missile Crisis happened, Khrushchev was seen as being weaker. He lost a lot of face. As much as Kennedy gained because of the Cuban Missile Crisis, Khrushchev lost. And I think he left office in like 66, 67 era. And there was a brief power struggle. Eventually, Leonid Brezhnev becomes the dominant power in the Politburo and ends up becoming premier of the Soviet Union. And Leonid Brezhnev and Nixon worked together, and one of the things that they established was SALT I, the Strategic Arms Limitation Talks. The Strategic Arms Limitation Talks turned into the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty. And SALT I provided for the first real substantial look at reducing arms between the two countries. And again, you have to understand that with what Nixon's doing in here in China and the Soviet Union with the SALT talks, it also, like when I was a kid and even now sometimes, you want things to happen more rapidly, especially in diplomacy. But diplomacy takes a long time. You have to establish relationships and things don't happen overnight. And SALT was really important for that reason, because it laid a really important groundwork for the relationship between the Soviets and the Americans, which will end up becoming undone, in the 1980s. Next, though, is energy crisis and problem with Israel. Okay, let me stop this. I can start and stop right there.